Welcome to Discovering True Health, where our goal is to provide you with cutting-edge health information through research, interviews with experts, and personal journeys to true health. Our message is a message of hope and healing, and our mission is to bring you on a journey to discovering true health, to not only find wellness, but to thrive. Hello and welcome to Discovering True Health, your weekly deep dive into health and wellness. Thank you so much for joining us today. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button to stay up to date on all our upcoming shows. We also have a lot more great information on our website, Instagram, and Facebook. All those links are below. So today we'll be learning about another one of the world's oldest medical systems. Last week, we learned all about Ayurveda, which originated in India. And this week, we'll be learning about traditional Chinese medicine and how to incorporate its principles into our strength and conditioning training. Now, traditional Chinese medicine originated about 3,000 years ago, and it sees the body as an integrated whole and focuses on helping people live in balance with themselves and with nature. And moving forward, I'll call it TCM as it's so much easier to say. So we're going to first get into an overview of some of the TCM principles. Then we're going to get into the importance of our fascia health and what the link is between diet, emotions, and our fascia system through the TCM lens. Now, my guest today is Andy Chan. He's a strength and conditioning coach with a master's degree in exercise science. He's also an educator, author, and his most important job, he's a father. He is from Hong Kong, and that's where he lives currently as well. And he also teaches education courses for the National Academy of Sports Medicine, TRX, TriggerPoint Performance, and PowerPlate. And in his recently published book that he wrote along with a TCM practitioner called Dynamic Balance, he breaks down the ancient principles of TCM, explores the interconnectedness between diet, emotions, and training through the lens of TCM, and gives a really great guide to integrate and incorporate these principles into our own strength and conditioning training by showing how TCM can really serve as a great complement to current exercise models. So thank you, Andy, so much for joining me today. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Thanks for having me on the show, Christy.
And I'm really looking forward to this because I feel like fascia is something as well that we're going to get into later that a lot of us don't know a lot about, and or myself especially, I don't really think about it as much as I should, and I didn't know as much about it. And your book was really eye-opening. Now, reading your book was incredible. It covers principles of Qi, Yin Yang, body meridians, topics around diet, fascia, emotions, imbalances, breathing, all through the scope of TCM, just to name a few of the concepts in your book. There's so many more. But what I really love too about your book is that you not only provide detailed information, but you also provide tools for self-assessment so we can self-evaluate. For example, you have a body constitution questionnaire so we can calculate our own primary body constitution. So can you share with us a bit about your journey and what led you to incorporate TCM into your own strength and conditioning training, and also what inspired you to write your book?
I'd love to. Well, growing up in Hong Kong, although I was familiar with some of the TCM terminologies, no one was able to explain to me the tangible benefits of TCM, other than the fact that I had to drink some herbal tea so that I can have better health. So I guess like most people, I put it off because I wasn't educated on the subject. So fast forward to 2013, I started spending 10 years in the US for school. And there, I found that TCM really was an alternative, and it really was, for lack of a better word, weird. I mean, the Yin Yang Sign was ubiquitous, and I could see it everywhere, from my dodgy massage store in the local mall to MTV, you know, the Yin Yang twins. And you just kind of see it in all these obscure places, and you're like, whoa, okay, so this is how the Yin Yang Sign is used in the US. And I really think it had an impact on how others perceive TCM. including me. But this all changed in 2016 when Michael Phelps was seen with these purple dots on his back in the Olympics during one of his swim meets. And, we tell people all the time that sometimes a little endorsement from elite athletes can go a long way, because all of a sudden people are crazy about these techniques. They're asking questions like, oh, does cupping work? What is it doing to my body? And just like that, it piqued my interest as well. And I started kind of examining TCM and incorporating different modalities like cupping and scraping back into my routine. But as I kind of progress in my fitness career, a lot of us, or it doesn't matter which career we're in, but sometimes we think about what we can contribute to the industry. And for me, looking at my background, growing up in Hong Kong, spending 10 years in the US with a master's degree in exercise science, I just thought maybe I could examine the intersection between TCM and fitness. Because, if you look on Amazon prior to Dynamic Balance, you cannot find a book that explains TCM concepts to the athletic community. At least not in the way that we do, because as you can attest to, the way we present our information is quite easy to digest, and there's nothing convoluted within Dynamic Balance, and that's the goal. And so, it comes down to, I don't want to say a calling, but more of a purpose, because if I can utilize my background to serve the industry, then I think I can at least offer another perspective. And that's kind of what the main vision is, so that people can just know another perspective, because we live in a day and age where these days there's just so much information out there. But if we can just kind of offer what we have to offer, then it never hurts to learn another perspective. So that's kind of the main reason why we wrote the book.
Absolutely. I totally agree. And it's so important to hear other people's perspectives and backgrounds and cultures, because I think incorporating the best of everything is really where it's at, I mean, incorporating the East and the West and the ancient and the new. And you talk about cupping. I myself have tried cupping, and I was lucky enough to live in several big cities like New York, where we have, a multicultural city where they have, places I could go to get to, I could go to the Russian baths and the Russian spas. I can go get cupping done. So I was lucky enough to get exposed to that, and it was incredible. Can you share with us a bit of an overview of TCM and its principles, and why it's beneficial to incorporate them into our strength and conditioning? I know that's a pretty broad question, but maybe just a smaller view for those that don't know anything about it.
Sure. Well, TCM is a complex system of medicine that has existed for thousands of years. And essentially, it is interested in what we in the West refer to as homeostasis in physiology. So what is homeostasis, right? It's the self-regulating process that the body goes through for survival. So within homeostasis, in the West, typically we'll hear of vocabularies like ATP, pH, blood sugar level, things of that nature, temperature. But if you think about it, back 2000 years ago, the Chinese would not have the equipment available to use these terminologies. So instead of using ATP, pH, blood sugar level, they use qi, blood, yin yang, 5 phases, etc., to explain and understand the relationship between the body and the surrounding environment. So similar to homeostasis, the balanced state is believed to be most conducive to human performance. And that's where we want to be, as that indicates that the body is coping all right with different things that are happening surrounding us. But even in the case where the body deviates a little bit from that balance point, TCM really is there to offer a solution so that we can get closer, or we can return back to that balance point where we perform best. So essentially, that's what TCM is about.
Yeah, that's so important. And like you said, one of the core beliefs of classic Chinese philosophy is to live in balance and harmony, both internally and externally. And you talk a lot about that in your book when it comes to diet, emotions, and movement. Can you tell us a little more kind of about what that means from a TCM perspective?
Sure. Well, I have to say that the overarching premise or the overarching theme of dynamic balance is that everything is interconnected. I think one of the core problems within Western medicine is, although the medicine has saved millions of lives, but I think one of the core problems within Western medicine is that everything was treated in isolation. So today, if you go to a hospital, you go to a doctor for one specific area. Well, that's great because that means that the physician you go to is an expert, is an absolute expert in that area because he or she spent 10 years in there. They've overlooked the important fact that, well, perhaps everything is interconnected. So within dynamic balance, it was thousands of years ago that the TCM practitioners figured out that everything is interconnected and you must train the body as a holistic unit. And that's kind of what we wanted to do, right? In sports medicine these days, or in performance enhancement these days, we realize you cannot just go to the gym without taking into consideration your diet. You cannot just talk about your diet without talking about your mental health, especially during COVID. People realize by staying at home, oh well, if my mental health isn't right, then there's a knock-on effect. And this knock-on effect essentially is what we want to address, or we want to bring forward in dynamic balance. And in terms of the Chinese perspective on the three areas, diet, emotions, and movement, the three key areas in our opinion for performance enhancement, we have to do a little crash course on the word qi, which I'm sure a lot of people don't really understand. So I'm going to try to explain this in 2-3 minutes.
Nice.
So if you remember previously, we said that the ancient scholars, they did not have access to fancy microscopic equipment to examine the human body. So what ended up happening was TCM terms often had two meanings associated with them. One, a functional meaning, second, a philosophical meaning. All right, so to the word qi, right? So functionally, qi is referring to energy of the body. So you need energy to sustain life, you need energy to perform. Yet the term is also philosophical and poetic because it's referring to something that you cannot see with a human eye. And I suppose usually it's the latter because it is philosophical. People put it off because, okay, so it's just philosophy. No, because functionally, it was referring to a concept that brought energy to the body. So in Chinese medicine, qi and blood are often paired together when explaining circulation. So if you go visit a Chinese medicine practitioner, they'll say, oh, your qi blood is flowing well, your qi blood isn't circulating very well, etc. So now that we know qi is the vocabulary that explains energy, we can take that a step further by applying the Yin Yang Sign to qi. So I think we all know in the US within our culture that yang kind of means something that's aggressive, or you've got a lot of energy. Yin, signified by Yin Yoga, usually things are a bit calmer and it's a bit slower. So if we apply the Yin Yang sign to qi, then we'll know that yang qi would mean that perhaps your circulation is flowing a bit too aggressive. So if you think about like when you're nervous, when your adrenaline is rushing, that's kind of what it is signifying. And on the other hand, if you think about yin qi, then perhaps you're too calm, right? You're just not aroused at all and slightly depressed. So in this way, you can think of just using yin yang and qi, they're just explaining energy through a different lens within Chinese medicine. Okay, so when it comes to diet, emotions, and movement or fascia, we can also explain different foods through that lens because different foods will have an effect on your energy. There's nothing weird about it. You can think about the last time that you've been to like a island vacation, because it's summer coming up, so perhaps some of our viewers are about to go on vacation. So you can imagine yourself sitting right next to a beach in on a July afternoon. At that moment, let me ask you, Christy, would you prefer coconut water or would you prefer hot chocolate?
Coconut water, for sure.
Yeah, coconut water. I think 99% of people, there's always someone weird out there, right? Okay.
True.
Anyways, say 99% of the people would choose coconut water because it in Chinese medicine, it cools our body down. And since we're in that heat already. So in that way, different foods will have an effect on the body from a TCM perspective, and it can alter our circulation. In the same vein, you can also apply to emotions because there are certain emotions that kind of invigorates our energy. And yet there are emotions that kind of brings us down and and to the state where we don't feel like doing anything. The same thing for movement. Today I use the example of Yin Yoga. If you go in to Yin Yoga where you're doing slow and sustained stretches, it's more likely going to calm your body down. And yet if you go in for a 100-meter dash, then it's going to bring your chi and blood up. So in this way, I hope we all can see that chi and blood, it's just the energy currency within TCM medicine to explain different phenomena. And what is important is all of these terms, chi, blood, yin yang, even, they have a functional meaning and a philosophical meaning. And that's important to keep in mind.
Beautiful. That's fascinating, because it's really almost like it's mindset shift to see it through that lens and see chi and see all these functions through that way. Like you said, it's not like seeing these specific, unincorporated, like holistic. We're just saying, the Western medicine where it's just, it's this specific little piece of your DNA, but we're, seeing it in this way. We're seeing it kind of as a holistic way where it all kind of fits together.
Yeah, and I would even say I might go off a tangent a little bit here. And this was actually the biggest challenge while writing our book, because I was working with a Chinese medicine practitioner, and me being educated in the Western sense, I just wanted to know what a thing is, right? Because the way that we think in the US is quite black and white. All right, you just tell me what this is and we move on. But this philosophical part within Chinese medicine really took a while to wrap my head around, because in Chinese, so if you look at the ancient texts that explain Chinese medicine, they used an analogy to explain another analogy. So essentially, so they paint a lot of pictures within the text, and at first, I guess that's the hardest part. So that's why I'm going to keep emphasizing things have a philosophical context to it, because it's a lot of times within Chinese medicine, things are not so black and white, because they're just trying to explain relationships between different phenomena. And I think readers definitely have to keep that in mind.
Got it. That's so interesting. Yeah, and it's that difference between, like you said, you coming from, you studying here in the States, and you're used to studying like very black and white, and that's where you kind of learned your foundational your education, and then working with this woman to write your book. I mean, yeah, that must have been a challenge. And it's so true. And, I have a family member who's a nurse, and she talks about how, she's like, you think of the entire health system like a pie, and each person is trained in just this tiny little slice. And that's exactly what they know. They don't know anything else in the pie, but their tiny little slice. And like you said, therein lies the problem. I mean, it's great that they're super duper specialized, but I mean, everything is interconnected. We're learning about the microbiome, and the microbiome, I know in Ayurveda back 3,000 years ago, they already had that incorporated. I'm sure Chinese medicine as well did incorporate the microbiome and the whole body into all their, different therapeutics, etc.
Yeah, of course, because they realize, the gut microbiome, for example, we talk about in diet balance, how our gut is connected with our emotions, because, our gut is the second brain. Through the microbiome in there, it communicates with the brain directly, and our brain affects our fascia, because what happens in the brain also will have a profound influence on how our body reacts. So you're definitely right. I mean, just a small food that you ingest might have a profound influence on your energy.
Yes. So let's get into this. I'm excited to talk about fascia. So can you give us first, let's understand what fascia is. Can you give us an overview of what fascia is, its role and function and importance in our body? And I'll tell you, from reading your book, I was surprised by just this.
Well, thank you. Fascia is a type of connective tissue that permeates throughout the entire body. So for those listeners or viewers who wants a visual image, you can think about the time when you purchase some raw chicken from the supermarket, and if you peek right underneath the skin, there's this filmy layer that's super thin above or in between the skin and the muscle, and that's a type of fascia. And in the human body, there are different layers of fascia. So under the skin, there are layers of fascia that wraps around the muscles, and there are layers of fascia that wraps around visceral organs. And the Latin root of the word fascia translates to band, because back in the day, it was believed that fascia was mainly to hold things together. So, if you look at our anatomy textbooks, usually people will cut open the cadaver and then they will brush aside the fascia in order to get to the muscle, and then they name the muscle according to its shape or its function. So that's kind of where the name came from, fascia. But turns out, in recent evidence, they tell us that their fascia plays a much bigger role in maintaining homeostasis, because they are rich in different receptors that communicates with the brain. And our book actually just zooms in on a specific layer of fascia, which is the myofascia, the fascia that wraps around our muscles, because our book is targeted towards the athletic population. So that's kind of the layer of fascia that we zoom in.
Got it. Yeah, that's fascinating, because I mean, you just said it actually communicates with the brain and has these receptors. And I was like, wait, really? Because I always just thought it was like to hold everything together, is this layer on top of everything. I didn't know that it had that extra part to it where it actually had some sort of other function.
Yeah, it is fascinating. I mean, I use an example all the time because, sometimes when we just state these statements, people would be like, oh, interesting, but is it really true? Because if you think about it, in one of my favorite books, the book is called Deathbound. So a physical therapist, his name is Kleisterat, he wrote a book examining the insidious nature of sitting. So for example, nowadays in quarantine, or when people are working for 8 hours a day, you sit for 8 hours a day. And you're going to find that your mood is impacted by the fact that you're sitting the entire day. And he went and then he explained why, because, I'm going to face the camera from the side on view. If I'm in this hunch posture, a lot of times I'm going to be stuck in chest breathing. And we know that through chest breathing, it affects our mind. So not only physically are we just kind of stuck in this position, mentally through our breathing, we're also impacting the mind. So together, they are a deadly combo in a way. And so in this way, we can see just by sitting, just by not moving, it affects your mood.
That's so insane. I mean, it's such an epiphany, because it's kind of like the first domino almost, because like you said, our breath is what really communicates to your body. Our breath is like puts us in fight or flight. If we're, breathing quickly and shallowly, if we're deep breathing, we, go out of it and go into homeostasis. And our breath is kind of the communication to our brain. So like you said, that's our posture is kind of the first thing. If we're slumping down, that constricts, which affects our breath, which affects our brain, which affects our mood, which
affects our digestion, right? So it's full circle.
Don't slouch. Get out of by sitting up there.
Yeah, well, actually, I would say slouching sometimes is not the problem, because there are instances where we have to slouch. For example, let's say if I'm sitting on a chair today, sometimes if I'm hyper focused on this task that I'm focusing on, it is impossible for me to maintain, because I have to have some willpower to maintain this position. But rather, what we want to make a point of is slouching is not the inherent problem. The problem is we slouch for an extended period of time without movement. And I would say it's important that we kind of move once in a while, just so that we don't get stuck in a position, because there are instances where we have to slouch, and if our body allows us to slouch, then chances are, there are demands for it in certain functional tasks. We must be in that position. So I think it's really important that we know that is the extended period of time that kind of make slouching bad.
So it's that balance. It's a balance of, and that's interesting. So basically the brain has a certain amount of energy. And if you're using your energy towards thinking and focus, your brain's not going to have the energy to keep your body perfectly upright. So in that case, think of it as a balance. It's so interesting. Now,
it's so interesting, isn't it?
Now, what are some of the differences between healthy fascia and unhealthy fascia?
The difference is we Let's use the analogy because I think the more analogies we have, the more visual image we have, I think the more we understand. And a common imagery that people use is a sponge that you find in the kitchen. And if you think about a healthy sponge, there's water inside, it's pliable, it is smooth, and it can change. It is malleable and that it could change into different shapes. And that kind of explains what smooth fascia is. When our fascia is healthy, then it is smooth. It is you can move it and you can have smooth movement and you can move well. On the other hand, if you think of a sponge that is rigid, that is stiff, that is just the texture just doesn't feel great and you just cannot alter it too much, then that paints a picture of unhealthy fascia for you. Because in the very same way, if we sit for 8 hours a day, the sponge, it dries up, you won't be able to move very well. And certainly the moment when you stand up, you intuitively want to do some stretches because you're like, oh, I feel stiff. And this is a great sign of unhealthy fascia because it just means that your fascia is dehydrated perhaps, and it has stiffened up and it becomes more rigid. And it's almost like sandpaper where it is not smooth at all. And that's what we don't want.
Got it. And we'll get into some tips on how to make that fascia healthy in a little bit, because that's important. So now in your book, you talk about the link between diet, emotions, and our fascia. We just touched a little tiny bit on that about our posture and how that can affect our fascia and then affects our emotions. Now, how are these interrelated, and what are some of the other factors that influence the health of the fascia system and kind of common causes of unhealthy fascia?
If you're listening to the show right now, it would be best to take out a piece of paper because I think what I'm about to say might be a lot. But if you don't have a piece of paper, it's all right. You can always review the video. And now we're going to go through three critical concepts, right? Your diet, emotions, and fascia, and how they are interconnected. So I want to start off by explaining your diet and your emotions. And maybe 10 minutes ago, we talked about gut microbiome. And in recent years, the West has caught on to the fact that our gut is kind of our second brain, because there are more than 100 million nerve cells, I think, within the gut that communicates with the brain directly. So anything that goes on in the gut will be reflected in our mental well-being, which makes sense. The last time you had some rotten pizza, chances are your mood will be impacted. So in that, and also to kind of explain how we intuitively know of the relationship between the gut and the brain, just think of the time when you were nervous, perhaps before an interview or perhaps before an important meeting. You would have had butterflies in your stomach. You would have had trouble digesting. And chances are you've also gone with your gut feeling when you make some decisions in the past. So in that sense, we have always known that what we're feeling in the mind will have an impact on our gut and our digestion. So that's kind of how our diet and emotions are connected. Now, on our emotions and fascia, we have to understand two nervous system response, the fight or flight and the rest and digest. So as the name suggests, fight or flight, 2000 years ago, if I'm just sitting down having my meal, I could experience a predator coming to hunt for me. And at that moment, let's say a bear is right in front of me, I can either fight it or I could either dash out. It's up to my choice. And as such, if I decide to do either of those two, which I probably will do either of those two, my mind has to prepare my body by stiffening up. Because if our fascia stiffens up, I can get ready and I can produce as much power as I need in order to dash out or to fight the person. On the other hand, if we think about rest and digest, that is the state where our heart rate kind of goes down, our blood pressure is lowered, and my muscle and my fascia becomes more pliable. So if we think of the sponge, in that rest and digest phase, because I'm trying to calm down, naturally my fascia will loosen up, it'll become more pliable, and it's a good time to regenerate. So in this way, we know that our mind has a profound influence on our fascia. But this goes both ways because we talked about the sitting example, how through slouching, I can trick my mind into fight or flight because it thinks that I am in flight or flight. And certainly these days we have a lot of false triggers within our society, right? Just go on social media and you'll be triggered like no other.
Mhm.
And so certainly when you feel triggered, you are also going to be stiff. And if you're stiff for a long time, you're also going to be triggered. So that's how our emotions and our fascia are linked. And lastly, our fascia and our diet. Well, we know fascia is mainly water and other fluids. And if we have a diet that dehydrates us, a diet that's filled with processed foods, then it's just going to drain the water out of our system. And that's going to influence the health of my fascia. And if I have dehydrated fascia, then it's going to impede or it's going to negatively influence my ability to move well. And so if we just kind of look at the big picture, what I eat into my system can affect my mood, and my mood can affect my fascia. And if we go the other way, if I sit all day, it could affect my mood. And if I'm not in the right place to eat, it doesn't matter what superfood I eat. If I have butterflies in my stomach, then you can be sure that, the superfood that you ingest will not be fully utilized. So yeah, hopefully that makes sense.
Absolutely. Now, can you talk a bit more about how our fascia can affect our emotions and nervous system? And you have this in your book. What is interception all about? Because I thought this was very fascinating. It was something I didn't know about.
Yeah. So we in exercise science textbooks, usually they would tell us that fascia has a couple critical roles, and that is number one, proprioception. So what that term means is our body's awareness in space. So if you close your eyes right now and if you lift your right hand up, chances are even when you close your eyes, you will still know where your right hand is.
Mm-hmm.
And that's proprioception, right? And that's the first one. Second one is what we call nociception, and that's our pain sensation. So, but what they ignore is a term called interoception. And interoception is the perception of sensations inside the body. So it is perceiving different physical sensations, such as your heartbeat, your respiration, your satiety, as well as your emotional well-being.
Mm.
And turns out in the past, scientists thought that the interoceptive receptors are mainly located in the organs because, if our organs don't feel well, then, our mood will be impacted. But now, recent evidence has found that our fascia is rich in interoreceptors. So in other words, if things don't go well in the fascia, it will also be communicated to the brain. And in that way, it is life-changing because previously, right, we have to think of the contrast. Previously, we just thought that fascia was mainly there to hold things together. But now, if there are interoceptive capabilities, then it means that what happens in the fascia will directly influence our brain, and that might influence our emotions. So it's these interoceptive receptors that is communicating this message with the brain.
Wow, that's so fascinating. So it actually can affect our mood if our fascia isn't healthy, um, and we're not taking care of it properly. That can translate into different types of outcomes like mood, pain, um, you know,
Poor digestion,
or
even.
digestion, right? And it can affect all those things. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would say of all those things, stiffness is already something that we're uncomfortable with. I mean, I'm sure everyone has experienced stiffness of some kind in their life, and of course, the stiffness can develop into pain. It could develop into whatever dysfunction, but it all starts with stiffness. And I think if you are experiencing some stiffness right now as you're listening or throughout your daily life, then it's a sign that perhaps you have to start incorporating some strategies to reverse this tightness or this sensation of tightness at least.
And are there any other symptoms or effects of unhealthy fascia to kind of be aware of? Like, so stiffness would kind of be the first one, being like, okay, I need to address something in my fascia. Are there any other types of symptoms or effects?
I think if you look at one's posture tells you a lot about what they're going through. I say that because I obviously I'm a strength and conditioning coach. I'm a fitness guy, so posture is something that I'm passionate about. And today, if someone walks through the door and you see that they're just kind of slouching, and chances are you never see a slouching person that looks confident, because we know our body language, it directly links with our emotions as well, which is also a sign that our fascia and emotions are intricately linked, because how we stand, certainly if you look at people who present public figures, when we do public speaking, you want to be open. And so certainly I would say your posture already indicates a lot about your mental well-being. And so if I look at someone and they have got a slouching posture, or if they've got some funky stuff going on, or if they complain that they feel stiff, then I know that these are red flags that, well, probably they should incorporate some strategies to alleviate these tightness. But certainly, if they say that they're going through a rough period of time, then you definitely know they're going through some body aches as well, because these things they come as a complete package.
Yeah, we're intertwined, all of it. It's so interesting. Now, let's say for those of us who may have a fascial imbalance at the moment, what are some good steps to kind of start to help reverse that damage?
Yep. I think in the health and fitness industry, there are a lot of products we know from a business perspective that it sells you hope. If you buy this product, it will get rid of all your stiffness and pain, and miraculously, you will live a normal life. And certainly, if you go in with all these different massage devices available, all these postural correction devices available, I actually like to take a different approach. And that is, you start by working on your breathing, right? Because we mentioned how by this point, okay, first of all, our mental health is directly related to our fascial health. And well, what's the one thing that you can do that doesn't cost you any money and you can do anywhere, you can do it anytime, and that is managing the way you breathe. So for my clients, I work in Hong Kong. So in Hong Kong, it is a stressful city. I'm sure it'll be similar in New York and other major cities. I give people the tip when they're waiting for the elevator, when they're waiting for the meals, when they are waiting for someone, when they're waiting for the train. I believe these are the perfect times to do or to incorporate your breathing techniques, because chances are nowadays we take out our phone and we scroll through whatever we have to scroll through on our phone. And chances are 90% of those stuff are useless, and they're false triggers of our mental state. And so, if people can just take those small windows to work on their breathing, it doesn't matter which technique they use, because they're built upon the same principle that you just have to use the diaphragm, deep breathing. You can choose the methodologies that you prefer, and I think that can go a long way, because if you can just downregulate the nervous system first, then everything else will come easy. And certainly in dynamic balance, we encourage people to use Chinese medicine modalities such as cupping, such as scraping, such as acupuncture, or in the Western exercise world, we could use a foam roller or even now a massage gun. But all those techniques are predicated on the fact that you have to downregulate your nervous system through breathing. So you can spend $500 today on the most expensive recovery massage gun out there. But if you're fighting yourself, if you're holding your breath, then you're wasting all your money and all your efforts and all your time. And I would say, so to circle back, the single most important strategy that we should incorporate every single day or as often as we can is just to be more aware of the way that we're breathing, because that's going to have a profound impact on our nervous system and entire body.
That makes so much sense. I mean, that's step one, and then everything else is secondary. And you, in your book, you have I believe it's a whole chapter or two on breathing and breathing techniques. So definitely go check that out. It's fascinating. All right. So now what about strategies that we can all incorporate to ensure our fascia system's functioning as optimal as possible and to kind of avoid imbalances? So we talked about the breathing and all the other stuff like foam rollers. Are there specific things with diet?
Yep. So I gave a webinar last week to one of the my corporate clients, and they wanted practical strategies to kind of reverse different imbalances that we have. And I actually I like to say it's not as difficult as people sound, and people like to complicate or overcomplicate different strategies that we use, because chances are, if we can just take maybe, so let's say today, let's paint a scenario, right? So that we're not just talking in abstract terms. We're speaking to a person that's been sitting for 4 hours in the morning, working, stuck in the office. Maybe they're in accounting or something. So they're just in front of a computer,
Yeah.
working their butts off. And what I recommend them to do before lunch is they stand up, they do some movement. It doesn't matter what, some movement is better than none, but slow and sustained movement. If they have any massage tools at the office, they can use it. If they don't, they can massage with their hand. You could do it anywhere. And they just spend 5 minutes downregulating their nervous system. And then they go eat. And obviously, when the way we should approach diet is simple, right? Cut out the processed foods, or at least minimize it, and take it slow. And when we all, I think sometimes when it comes to diet, I'm a bit cautious in going over the principles, because I think it's all different. And sometimes if I just say eat this, someone will always come up and say, oh, I'm allergic.
It's different for everybody. Yeah. I mean, we
Yeah,
really have
yeah,
to
yeah.
do our own food allergy testing, and everybody's body is different. I mean, I just went through that, so I can speak from my own experience that that's a game changer if you know your specific bodies. So yeah, I mean, an apple could be great for you, but an apple could be bad for me and cause inflammation. So yeah, it's
Exactly. So I think it's a process of trial and error sometimes, even that you kind of
Mhm.
have to eat. But what's important is we give out some guiding principles in TCM, and that is you have to eat according to season. In the beginning, we kind of said, well, you wouldn't drink hot chocolate in the middle of the summer because it's just
Mm.
counterintuitive. And it's common sense. I don't want to say common sense, but it's intuition like these that drives our diet. And you want to eat season appropriate food. I think growing up, that's kind of one of the things that sounded a bit odd. What do you mean? Because we live in the age of globalization, and I could get a superfood from Colombia today, but
Right.
that is so far away from where I live that if we adhere to the TCM principles, I wouldn't eat those things, because we want to eat things that are relatively close, because that's kind of what the nature had in store with us. So when it comes to diet, certainly what we recommend is you eat foods that are in season, and you cut out the processed foods, and then you don't stuff yourself too much. So we have a principle called 70% principle, and that is we should stop when we perceive that we're 70% full.
Mm.
Because if we're overly full, let's say today if you go to a buffet or something, you'll know that being overly full will also impact your digestive health, because it just doesn't feel good. And yeah, I think if you stick to these principles, it will go a long way when it comes to your diet. So breathe before you eat, incorporate foods that are in season, don't eat too stop when you're 70% full. And then after the meal, go for a short walk. Don't immediately go back to your computer, because
Sit down again.
exactly, because then you're just wasting all the effort.
Yeah. Now, I also too want to mention in your book, Dynamic Balance, I saw you do have a worksheet that you can evaluate your own fascia and, identify ways you can create more balance for yourself. So that's a pretty great tool you have in your book as well around fascia.
Thank you. For Dynamic Balance, we try to make it more interactive,
I love that
because
about it.
yeah, because here are two things. I think a lot of books, they're just too one-sided. And I think just doesn't serve well within our generation, because we want something that's more interactive, that we can actively participate. So, for your diet, for your emotions, for your fascia, we have different activities that people can do, just so they know more about themselves. Because in this process of discovering true health, we have to understand where we're at, right?
Mhm.
Because you can listen to all the podcasts today, you can binge watch all of them, but if you don't know where you stand, then I would argue that you're not maximizing the resources available. So for that reason, we have loads of questionnaires and activities for people to participate.
Yeah, it's so great to be able to do that self-analysis and really learn where you're at, and then be able to be like, all right, this is where I'm at, and then you have steps to go from there. So it's a really powerful tools you have available.
Yeah, and I'll also say today, if you go into any type of practitioner or any type of service industry, if if the person you're talking to is just giving you generic advice without understanding your current situation, then you also know that the person is not really doing their job because
Mhm.
everyone is different. And unfortunately, we kind of live in a day and age where we can scale things and we can be lazy and we can just give generic advice. So just be cautious because yes, a lot of us are similar in that we can share basic principles of lifestyle strategies. But when it comes to specific things like what food to eat or specific ways to manage our emotions, if you have uh, something unique that's going on in your life, or when it comes to movement because of pre-existing condition, then you need someone that can write you a specific plan, not just some generic advice, because we all are different in our unique ways.
Absolutely. No, nothing is a one size fits all. We definitely are unique. And that's what I love learning about, these different practices like Ayurveda and TCM, because they really approach health and wellness from that point of view.
Yeah, more perspectives, the better.
Yes, absolutely. Now, for those who would like to find out more information about you and your book, where can we find you?
I am on Instagram and my Instagram name is Tsz Chiu Andy. So TszChiu Andy. And my website is tszchiu.com. And for Dynamic Balance, it is available on all major platforms. So Amazon, Barnes& and Noble, Hudson, anywhere that you can find.
Wonderful. And I'll post links below to where we can find your book and your website and your social media. And I highly recommend this book if you're an athlete looking for an edge, or you just want to find ways to other ways to incorporate into your own practice to become a lot healthier and find balance. Before we wrap it up, do you have any final thoughts or words for those looking to improve their performance or their health and well-being?
So we all have to remember that chasing dynamic balance or chasing better health, it's a process. It's certainly not a binary question because a lot of times we fall into this pitfall of are we balanced or not? But you have to know that our body is constantly changing. So as we work on having a healthier life or better lifestyle, remember that this is definitely a process.
Beautiful. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your journey and your wisdom on TCM and how to keep our fascia healthy and functioning well. We now have some great tools to start with, and that we can all incorporate. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Christy.
Remember, knowledge is power. The more you understand about your body, the better you're able to stay healthy and prevent disease. And a quick reminder, I'm not your doctor, so please don't take this as medical advice. If you have specific questions about your healthcare, feel free to reach out to your practitioner. And if you like this video, please like and share it with others. This information could really help someone you may know. And also hit that subscribe button to be sure you don't miss out on our future shows. And stay tuned for the next episode of Discovering True Health.